Hi, this is Marc Lipkin. I'm the Director of Publicity with Alligator Records for the past 33 years, and you're listening to Talking Blues.
So, Mark, I'm going to begin by asking you how you first got into music. Not necessarily the blues, but how you first, or do you remember the moment you connected with music?
I do. In fact, it oddly didn't come from my parents. My folks were a little older, and their record collection consisted of, let's see, Fiddler on the Roof and some Myron Cohn records. And as I was turning 10, 11, I probably heard some, a lot of AM radio in Chicago. WLS was blasting the top 40 hits. And I started liking this song or that song, a Steve Miller song here, a Beatles song there. And I, for whatever reason, in about 1972, and I may have the date wrong, because I could be a little young for that, I found Jim Croce, of all people, and I just fell in love with Bad Bad Leroy Brown. It took place in Chicago. It was rough and dangerous. It was fun. There was a whole start to finish story going on. Not a blues song, but not unlike a blues song either. Um, and I bought that record. It was the first record. I have thousands of records in my collection now, and that was the first one I ever bought. I still have it, but it talked to me, and that song really did speak to me. And as I got a little bit older, I just on my own started liking music and liking records and liking that these things were more fun than baseball cards because you can hold them and you can look at them and you can read the back and then you can put them on and hear this and live this music. Um, but not too long after that, maybe I was 12 years old, and a friend of mine's brother had a bunch of records, and I don't know how I ended up with it. And I'd like to think I didn't steal it, but I got a copy of Muddy Waters' Sail On record, and it was an old, probably late '60s pressing, and all the songs in it were from the early '50s, as I read on the liner notes. And I was listening to that, put this record on, and it had nothing to do with me at all. It had nothing to do with my background, my upbringing, my parents, my relatives. It was from a different universe. It was this music. It was haunting. It was real. It was seemed dangerous to me. It was recorded in Chicago, where I lived, and it didn't seem like the Chicago I knew at all. And I listened to that record over and over, specifically the song "She Moved Me." I was moved every time I heard that song. Well, where are these sounds coming from? This was not like anything on the top 40 radio I knew. And around the same time, maybe a year later, I just listened. And I started going on my own, maybe 13, 14. I'd be riding my bike to the used record stores. And back in the day, you can go to the used record store and buy, especially blues records on the north side of Chicago. You could buy oodles and oodles of records, original copies for $1, $2. If you got lucky in the 50-cent bin, you could just, and week after week, I was just loading up with this great music. Not all blues, but a lot of blues, mostly blues. But I like Bob Dylan, I like the Beatles, I like, some things from my era, but usually it's older than me. I like older stuff. Um, and I got Bob Dylan's first record. And the one original on Bob Dylan, there's a lot of blues, a lot of folk acoustic blues on there. I heard covers that he was doing of a different kind of blues though than sort of Muddy Road. At that point, he was, and in his one original song, the song to Woody, he talks about Cisco and Sonny and Leadbelly. And I got a Cisco Houston record and I didn't like it. What is this? Sea shanties. It wasn't for me. And then I got a Leadbelly record, and I got a Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee record, and that led me to Lightning Hopkins. And all of a sudden, I was like, it was different. Here was the Chicago money stuff, but then here was this whole folk blues stuff, and it opened my whole world up. I mean, everything started coming together, and I was buying and studying this music just on my own because I liked it, and it moved me. And I was too young to go see any of it because I was 14. You had to be 21 to get in the clubs where all these musicians were playing. I remember I went as a kid and saw Sunnyland Slim at the Chicago Historical Society, who was just doing some middle of the day event on a Saturday. But I said, there's a real blues guy. I'm going. Right? It was, in some big auditorium. It was not a blues show per se. It was a presentation of it, but there's my first blues guy.
I wonder, I don't know if it's because it was so out of worldly for you or just so different that you were attracted, but why do you think you were attracted to the blues?
The realism. I think it was just the raw emotion. For whatever reason, it spoke to me. It reached out and grabbed me. And I know a lot of people say that Bruce says that about the first time he saw Mississippi Fred McDowell. And it was this almost, I heard him tell that story, and it's almost the same thing. This music came out of my speakers and just shook me. And it was felt so real and different than anything else, even Beatles. Like Beatles, I love the Beatles.
Hmm.
But this was so different and so raw and sexual and not mean, but slightly kind of dangerous, maybe to me. It just sounded. It just sounded. It just. I wanted more of it. I just wanted to hear more and more of it by as many people that were playing this kind of music.
Did you ever play music?
A little bit. When I got a little older, I learned some guitar chords. I played some harmonica, and the better the guitar player, the more I could fake being a decent harmonica player, but never seriously enough to want to pursue it. In fact, there's a funny story. It's a little bit of a digression. I was a big Sanford and Son fan, as a lot of people were back in the day. I loved watching Sanford and Son, and there's an episode with BB King in it. And it's actually a pretty funny episode. It's pretty well written. It's got a good storyline. That doesn't matter. But at the end of the episode, BB King jams in a club, and I'll say the characters' names, not the actors. There's Fred and his friend Bubba and Aunt Esther, and they're all watching BB, and one after another, they're taking turns doing a verse, singing a song. They're singing, well, I forget what song he was playing, but they're all singing a verse, and they're having a great time. And at one point, the camera cuts to Fred Sanford, Red Fox, and just shows him holding his head up and his fists together, and he's ecstatic. He's absolutely ecstatic. And I remember thinking as a young child, I want that feeling. I want to swim in a swimming pool of that feeling all the time. I want to be that ecstatic and that excited about everything I do. The music's great. We'll call it excited about blues, but I wanted that feeling. And I didn't know it at the time, but that stayed in my mind that blues music was making these people feel so good and so full of life, and I just wanted more of that. And in another aside, Kingfish told me, Christone Kingfish Ingram, about 3 years ago, that he also, as a kid in reruns, saw that episode, except he didn't want what Fred had. He wanted what BB had, he told me. He saw BB playing and he wanted that. It's just so interesting to me, like, to hear that story.
Hmm.
Like, we're two generations apart, but here's the same incident that's affected both of us in kind of a funny and in different ways. That's not the thing that made me do what I do, and it's certainly not what made Kingfish do what he does, but it helped.
Okay,
There it was, and it helped.
but before doing what you do, you weren't sure that this is what you were going to do.
Oh, I had no idea what I was going to do. So I vended. I did as I was getting older through school, I was a regular high school kid. When I went to college, I vended. I was a beer vendor and a peanut vendor at the Chicago Cubs games and the Chicago White Sox games and the Bulls and the Chicago Bears games. It was a great job. It was a union job. I think by the time I was selling beer, I was making a quarter a can, and it was a lot of money at the time. And it was hard work, but there you were. You were outside with people, and you know, you were at all parts of the park. So at some point, yes, I ran into Red Fox. And I told him my love for him. And I told him the BB King story. And he couldn't have been nicer or friendlier. And he gave me a big tip because I said that I knew he was friends with Malcolm X because I had just read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And there's a whole scene in that book about Malcolm Little, Malcolm X's man, running with Fred Sanford in St. Louis, or running with Red Fox in St. Louis. And Red Fox was so amazing, gave me a nice big tip that day. So the vending too was fun and interesting to me. And among meeting people like Red Fox or meeting different people out there, the Cubs back in the early 80s used to have concerts after their games on Fridays. And one particular Friday, they had Chuck Berry. I was so excited to see Chuck Berry. I quit vending probably in the sixth inning. I think we usually would have sold beers through the end of the seventh. And I remember quitting early so I can go change, go to the locker room, get back to my street clothes, and be ready for the show. As I'm walking back to the vendor's locker room at Wrigley Field, who's coming at me but Chuck Berry, all by himself. I'm by myself. He's by himself. I went up like a fanboy. Hey, Chuck, I love you. You're the best. I can't believe you're here. He looked at me and just swore a blue streak up and down the street at me. Who the F are you? What are you doing here? This is my hallway. Get out. You can't be here. Where's my manager? It was really something, but lots of swear words messed in. And I just looked at him wide-eyed and, open-jawed. And finally, I got the courage to say, Mr. Berry, there's probably 300 more vendors. that are going to be following me down this hallway in about 10 minutes. You might want to know that. The F they are. They are not. No one's coming this way. You get the hell out of here. I was like, okay, I'll see you out there. And in hindsight, at the time, I was a little bit like, what did I do wrong? I was a little sad. But in hindsight now, as I recall the story, I like to say that in his own way, Chuck wrote me a song. He wrote me his very own Chuck Berry song full of every nasty swear word you could imagine.
How did that affect you? Because people say you don't want to meet your heroes. I mean,
No, and I didn't go to meet him. It just was a
yeah, yeah.
happenstance. I laughed it off. It was funny. Like if I didn't do anything, if I did something wrong, I didn't do anything wrong, and I got yelled at, I was laughing, and my friends and I loved the show. We watched the set. He had some pickup band that was probably not even very good. I don't remember, but there was Chuck Berry. So I didn't. And in hindsight, and I think even at the time, I knew I had enough foresight that I knew I had a story in my pocket. And I was about stories. I've always been about stories and collecting them and living life to the point where you have them, where you have a collection of great stories and stuff that happened. So it didn't affect me bad at all, but it made me feel like, hey, this is pretty close to me. Here's Chuck Berry. He's one of my heroes. While I was vending too, there was an older gentleman named Maurice Green. If I was 21 at the time, he must have been in his 50s. And he was an old jazz player, and his uncle knew Charlie Parker, and he took me a couple times after White Sox games. He took me to some Southside bars, and that affected me a lot. We went to the Cheetah Lounge over at 75th and Western. It wasn't even a blues club. It was just a bar I shouldn't have been at. And everyone's so good to me. And Maurice introduced me as this good guy, and we talked music. And there I was, this 20-year-old talking music and jazz and blues with all these older black guys at this Southside bar. And that was a big deal to me because that made me feel like I have other options. There's other things in this world besides, working in a bank or sitting in a cubicle. And so I went to college. I got a degree in English. I specialized in writing. I did the Europe trip after college and just traveled around the continent, which was great. And I came back and needed a job and didn't know quite what to do. My friend was moving to Los Angeles. I went with him. And hard to say how it happened, but I landed a job at the Writers Guild of America. That's the trade union for screenwriters, for television and movie screenwriters. And I worked in the publicity department. I had a little bit of publicity experience. I did an internship in college. I didn't know how to write, and it was a fantastic gig.
This
So
is
there
in
I
LA.
was. This was in Los Angeles. From 1 minute to the next, I didn't plan on living there. I didn't plan on getting a job there. And I moved in. I got an apartment with my friend, and I learned the ropes of how to sort of work in a PR office. And that was 1988, and there was a big strike that year. So the reason I got hired so quickly is because they needed manpower to work that strike, and I did. And I met, my daughters accused me of name dropping, but I met people from Billy Wilder, the great screenwriter Billy Wilder, to Jack Klugman, to Ed Asner, and the guy that wrote the Batman TV show, Lorenzo Semple. I couldn't believe I was meeting him. So it was a fun experience, and I've always liked fun, and I always like to mix work with fun. I was there a couple years. My dad got ill back in Chicago. I came back to be with my family. I knew I didn't want to spend my life out in Los Angeles, and ended up working just a couple of jobs I didn't necessarily like. I worked in a computer.
When you said you didn't want to spend your life in Los Angeles, was it because of family or was it
Yeah, because of
you
family.
missed the snow?
I'm a Chicago guy.
Okay.
I I like real. This is why I like blues too. I like things that are real. And so much about LA just it isn't. From the warm weather in February didn't seem real to the movie industry, which there's nothing real about at all. And the people aren't necessary, but for me, and it's a great place, and I love my job and I love the people I work with. But I just knew I was going to eventually come back, and like most of my life, I made big decisions with not much of a plan under it. And the plan was I just coming back, and we'll see what happens. And I did end up working just because I needed money. A couple jobs I very much didn't like. One was at a bank in a communications department at a bank, a corporate, very large corporate bank. And it was there that I just hated my job so much. I disliked my supervisor so much, whose only job I could figure was being my boss. I didn't know what her job was other than always being my boss. And one day, and I'm going to date myself bad, at my job, at my low point, I pulled out the yellow pages. Remember the yellow
Oh
pages?
yeah.
And I thought, if I hate this so much, what would be more fun to do? And I like music and I like blues and I like records. And I was looking through the yellow pages and I thought, well, I don't really want to work at a record store. Nothing against that. Just not what I went to college for, kind of. And I didn't see that as something in retail that I wanted to do. And I kept looking. I saw record labels. And it's like, they're the very first one, Alligator Records. I was like, that's right, Alligators in Chicago. Of course they are. And sitting at my desk on bank time, I wrote a letter to Bruce. And I said, here's me. Here's what I can do. Here's what I know about this music. I know how to write. I know how to promote. I know, and I have the love for it and the enthusiasm. So he wrote back immediately. I got a letter in the mail maybe a week, 2 weeks later saying, hey, you sound cool. I'll keep your resume on file. If something opens up, I'll let you know.
And what did
And
you
I thought,
think? Did you think he would get back to you?
oh, heavens no. And I thought, what a nice guy for him to answer.
Hmm.
And I didn't even respond. Back in the day, now it'd be easy to throw an email back and say, hey, thanks for the nice note. We'll stay in touch. But back then, no, I just let it go. So I had continued on another couple jobs I wasn't liking, and I made a big decision that if I wasn't going to be happy, at least I was going to have a little money in my pocket. So I was going to go to law school. And I took the LSAT test, and I was ready to go to John Marshall Law School here in Chicago. And I think it was a couple days after I got the results of my LSAT. My mom couldn't have been more proud of her son who was about to go to law school. Bruce called out of the blue. My phone rang. And back in the day, if you moved, and I don't know how it was in Canada, but in Chicago, before cell phones, if you moved from one neighborhood to another, you more than likely had to change your phone number. And I had moved 3 or 4 times, kind of all in the same area, and I never had to change my phone number. Had I changed my phone number, that call never would have came. The call was, this is Bruce at Alligator. I need a publicist right now. And I interviewed with him. And I interviewed again. I think we interviewed for 2 or 3 hours. He told me to, we talked about writing and stuff and who my contacts were. And I felt good about our talk. I felt like we were getting along and I felt like we were connecting. And then he ends the interview and says, I got to go to the studio tonight. He was recording Maurice John Vaughn at the time, I think. And he said, write me a spec bio, a fake bio, a bio on an artist. Just write it and then I'll look at it. He showed me a writing sample. So I wrote a fake bio on Little Willie John. And I wrote it as if Bruce had rediscovered Little Willie John. He wasn't really dead. Bruce found him somewhere. And here he was. And I gave it to Bruce, handed it to him. We had a second interview. And he looked at it and he made a bunch of corrections on it, a bunch of edits. This is wrong. I wouldn't say this. And he handed it back to me. We just kept talking and that was it. I went home. And he had told me he was going to be in the studio again that night. And I took the initiative. I made all the changes. I went home. I worked on the fake bio. I made all the changes. And I found the studio where he was at. And I went there and I knocked on the door. And I thought, no, I'm taking a risk here because the guy's working. I didn't know Bruce at all at the time. And I got in. And I was let in the studio. And I said, hey, man, here's the corrections on this bio. And I think he was kind of impressed
Wow.
that I went to that effort. And we had fun. I stayed in the studio that night and just hung out. And he was showing me what he was just being Bruce and showing me what he does and how he was doing it. And I was, my eyes were popping out of my head because I was with Bruce Igauer in a recording studio from 1 minute to the next. And he's here, he is holding this fake bio going, hey, this is good, or, nice correction. So then it took about a week, and I know he had a fight with the staff because he didn't do a lot of hiring outside of the company. There was a lot of internal promotions, and he hired me. And it was life-changing. My mom was a little sad at the time because there went her son, the lawyer, right out the door. But in hindsight, it all worked out.
I'm curious. You had some experience in the publicity world at the Screen Actors Guild.
Yeah.
I don't know if you still the Screen Writers Guild. I don't know if you had that experience once you came back to Chicago. Like, how familiar were you as a publicist? Or
not very. I was an assistant in Los Angeles. I was good enough to know how to deal with celebrities, how to deal with celebrity management, how to work as a team, how to have a singular goal. The publicity department at the Writers Guild was not so much publicizing the writers. It was, we were part of the union. So the work I was doing was more, union side work, not the writer side. We were working on behalf of the writers. My goal was to make these writers look good, but I wasn't in the business of directly publicizing any given project or writer.
So when you get this job, do you know what you're doing? Like, do you have a sense of what it is to be a publicist for Alligator Records? Because it's a totally different industry. It's a
No,
different, right?
no.
Okay.
When I started on my first day, I had no idea what to do. I had no clue. I mean, I knew how to write. If my first assignment was going to be to write a bio, I could do that. If my first assignment was going to be, you know, get Kenny Neal onto Late Night with David Letterman, I was going to be in a whole mess of trouble because number one, they didn't book blues, and number two, I didn't have anybody's number yet.
Okay. So who was the first artist you had to deal with when you
It was,
first?
yeah, the first day on my work was Kenny Neal.
Okay.
They had just finished putting out Little Ed's "What You See Is What You Get," and that promotion was sort of still in, so there was still work to be done. But the next new album on the docket was going to be Kenny Neal, and I didn't know Kenny. I knew who he was, but so it was a lot of immediate, like I was underwater, and I didn't care because I was at Alligator Records and I had a job, and I was the publicist. My goodness, that meant more to me. And I didn't know the term "fake it till you make it" yet. I just knew I was good at work. I was enthusiastic. I certainly knew the music, and I knew I could do it. I knew no matter what the assignment was, I was gonna do a good job because I was gonna let go once my foot was in that door. There's no way I was gonna not. I was gonna let it close on me.
Can you
And
just paint a picture for me? So this is 1992.
this would have been November, September of '92.
Okay, so going on to 93. But at that time, we're talking CDs more than albums.
We were not doing records when I
And
started.
then the importance of blues radio. But can you just give me an overall sense of what that blues world looked like back in 92?
Sure. Well, it was crowded. So Alligator had a big roster. We at the time we managed Lonnie Brooks, Little Out in the Blues Imperials, and Coco Taylor. Alligator was in the management business at the time. And those guys worked. I remember being shocked seeing their tour schedules. Just those three artists and the amount of dates that they were playing 250, 300 nights a year sometimes. And they were playing the college circuit, and they do a southern swing, and they would go do the west coast swing over and over. As soon as one swing would stop, the next one would start. And there was a lot of newspaper and magazine. There were a lot of places to publicize blues artists, and a lot of people that were writing about them. The Chicago Tribune had a blues writer on staff, not just a music writer, they had a blues writer on staff. The Chicago Sun-Times had a person whose main job was, I think, copywriter, but he was the blues guy. And when there was blues news, those were my main two guys that I went to in the city. And that is different now, because now most newspapers, if they exist, don't have music writers. I used to say, if you can get say a review in the New York Times, you can get your message out to, this is '92, one review, 3 million people. Now it's almost, you need 3 million reviews that go to one person each. That's the dynamic. It's changed. It's
Um,
hard to get mass acceptance and to reach.
are you responsible for North America or America only, or are you international and you're doing
When,
Europe?
when I started, I only did domestic. I really only did United States. And then as the years went on, I just kept taking more and more on. We did have an international staffer who wasn't necessarily a publicist. He dealt with the international distribution, but he worked with the distributors on publicity. So we really didn't have a presence. As of maybe 7, 8 years ago, I've taken over the international as well. And same with our radio department. And now between myself and Tim Colwith, who does our radio, um, are worldwide. And we're very, very well connected. In fact, nowadays, I think there's again more interest, press interest, and radio interest in Europe for a lot of blues than there is here.
You started in November '92. At what point do you think I know this job now, or I'm comfortable
So
with what I'm doing?
let me preface your question by what happened at 5:30 p.m. on my very first day of work.
Okay.
I was sitting in my office. Now, our building, I'll try to paint this picture quickly, is an old refurbished Chicago 3 flat.
Hmm.
You've been there.
Yeah.
It's I think we use load-bearing paint to hold the walls up. It's really an old, decrepit building, which is fine. So I'm in my office. I had just gone through my whole first day. I sure my head was spinning on a swizzle stick, and I was just kind of sitting there, wondering what time is going home time, and maybe what I'm having for dinner. And out of nowhere, like a hurricane, Bruce Iglauer comes barreling into my office, screaming at the top of his lungs, "If you're not busy every minute of every day, you're doing something wrong." And I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten into? Now, I will say in the course of 33 years, I'm not sure that I fully followed that dictum every single day and every minute, because you can't. But the point was well taken. You had asked me earlier about different points in my career where things were said or things happened that set me on a course. So when Bruce did that and Bruce said that, I got it. I knew what he was talking about. People aren't going to be calling me, begging me to write about my artist. If I'm not busy on that phone, contacting people saying, why aren't you writing about my artist? Here's 15 reasons you should be writing about my artist. Here's contextualized why this artist matters in the course of blues history, or where they came from, how they ended up where they are. They're not just a guy or a woman that picked up a guitar or a microphone and started singing. They're here because they came from a history of blues that brought them here. And I got what Bruce said. As scared as I was and as like mind blown as I was that he did that, I got it. And going forward, every day I still think about that today. It was so funny and so kind of true. So your question, like, when did I start feeling like I knew what I was doing? I don't know. A few years probably. I mean, in some cases, right away. When I started working those Little Ed tour dates and I was getting interviews set up in the Chicago Tribune or in the Dallas, Morning News or wherever they'd be playing. And it took me a while to start to get familiar with my contacts. Who's my person in Dallas? Who's my person at the LA Times? Who do I reach out to at the new Conan O'Brien show? How do I get to know these people? And, I'm in Chicago. I'm not in LA. I'm not in Los Angeles. I'm not at a lot of events, a lot of press events, a lot of mixers where people do get to know each other. And I had to do it all by phone and back in the day by mail. There was no, we didn't even have email when I started.
Right. So yeah, it would have been everything by phone.
Right.
And then you would be manually, physically sending out CDs,
yeah,
stuffing envelopes,
and we would manually send out. One of the things Alligator does, and we still do it to this day, and I think it's one of the things that has helped keep the company afloat of the many things that everybody does, is we work as a label every single tour date of every one of our artists as a retail stop. In other words, if back in the day, Coco Taylor was in Champaign, Illinois, and Lonnie Brooks was in Dubuque, Iowa, and Little Ed was in Minneapolis, and Kenny Neal was in Salt Lake City. We were working every one of those shows, and by working those shows, I mean about 6 weeks before that show, we were sending press releases out. We would send press releases out to the press that mattered in the area, the radio, the press, the retail, anyone we knew in the area involved in music. We let them know that show was happening. And then we followed up. So I would follow up with the press. Tim Kolick would follow up with the radio. And we would do everything we can to get an interview here, a radio spot there, to get more people in the door. And the more people in the door, the more chance those people are going to go home with a CD. They're going to wait and get it signed and meet that artist. And as the years went on and as retail sort of collapsed and as opportunities, even press and radio opportunities shrunk, to this day, we still do that as our business model to make sure that these tours are successful and that we could keep our product, keep our records selling. There's no better, blues is such an in-your-face music and the artists are so personable. It's not like there's a wall between artist and fan. In most of the blues clubs, you're 3 feet away from the artist when he's playing or 10 feet away. And after the set, 90% of these artists are going to go mingle and meet the fans and stand at the merch table or sell CDs. And a lot of fans, a lot of people, if we can get more people into the venue and they love that show and they can meet that artist and they're going to buy a CD and get that thing signed. So for us, that's really has always been a very important part of what we do. And part of what I do specifically is that tour press. So now we do have in my department, I do have a person I work with, Chris Levick, who primarily handles tour publicity these days. I handle more of the just national and international press on the bigger level. Um, but we still do it, and it makes a difference. And it's hard, and it's harder than it has been because there's just less places, there's less newspapers that are running previews and less entertainment weeklies. Now there's a lot of websites and podcasts, and we dig and we do our best to find outlets that matter without wasting our artists' time.
I know your job is to work with your artists and get to know them, and then to use that knowledge to send the word out to media. I wonder, as a blues fan, the guy who fell in love with Muddy Waters and the blues, when was the first time when you might have started working with an artist at Alligator who you were truly a fan of? That all of a sudden you thought, oh my God, I can't believe I'm working with this person.
Again, all the artists, I love every artist that I work with, but
Right.
there's something about Alligator that really does attract the talent, and I think Bruce's vision has not faded in all these years. When we signed Luther Allison, to me that was pretty next level. And as much as I love Coco Taylor, and had all her records long before I started working at Alligator, her chess records, um, love Lonnie Brooks and love Little Ed and these guys. I remember seeing Elvin Bishop and Coco Taylor and Lonnie Brooks at the Cubby Bear in Chicago, one of my first weeks, and I brought a buddy of mine with me to that show, and he was mad at me because the hell did I get to do this for? He was a lawyer, and he was really upset, like jealously upset. I was, don't do that. Let's have fun here. But that was a big deal. Seeing Elvin, I was like, oh my God, Elvin Bishop. But when Luther signed, he came to the office. And here's another one of those sort of things that happened. And I was nervous, and I had my Luther records with me, and I didn't ask him to sign them, and I wish I would have now. But I brought them with. And I shook Luther's hand. And Luther was, I don't know if you had the chance to meet him at all, but he
No,
was a
this is one of my
very
great
nice man.
regrets.
Eye contact, he was a connector. He often talked about himself in the third person, which was sort of funny. But he was a connector. And I said, Luther Allison, my goodness, what an honor it is to work for you. It was in our warehouse, and if I went back to the warehouse, I could show you right where I was standing when I said that to him. And Luther took both of my hands in his hands. He cupped my hands in his. He looked me in the eye. He said, no, Mark, you don't work for me. You work with me. And I thought, not only is that a nice thing to say, but that's how it is with everybody at Alligator. That's why we are Alligator. That's why we do like we do. We're a family. We work together. And the more success we're going to have as artists and label is, I don't need to be friends with these people. I don't need to go to their house for Thanksgiving. But to all be on the same page, to all be knowing that we're all professionally working and having a good time while we're doing it, it's a boost forward. And when Luther said that to me, that you don't work for me, you work with me, that suggested to me every artist that I work with, that's how it is. We're all in this together. And it was working with Luther was just marvelous. He, when we did 3 records, when he was just on the cusp of reaching that very rare next level, that BB King, that Buddy Guy, that Luther was an incredible performer and artist. He became later in his career, when we signed him, he had become a much better songwriter than he was even 10, 15, 20 years earlier. And his delivery, he was doing Springsteen-like concerts, 3 hours, 3.5 hour shows that just would wrestle the emotion out of you and just drip you with sweat until both he and you were finished. And when he got sick, he didn't tell anybody for a little while. He was diagnosed with cancer and passed pretty quickly. He still did, I think, another 5 or 6 shows before he quit. And it was at this time my wife was pregnant with our first daughter. And he took time from his hospital bed and wrote me, and she was born right while he was dying. My daughter was born. And he wrote a note, we got a nice card in the mail to Marc and Cindy, and congratulations on the birth of your daughter, Luther Allison, right? And like, he probably had days to live. So these are things that not just like, oh, isn't that nice, but it puts me, it just makes everything that I do seem worth it and seem real. Because if I do what I do well, I'm helping artists have a career. I'm helping them have more people in their at their gigs, and in the long term, I'm helping them sustain a career for their lifetime. All of us, not just me. This is everybody at Alligator. Specifically, what I do is just a little part of this whole bigger package that we do for any artist.
Okay, so I have to say that even though you didn't get your Luther Allison album signed, I hope you kept that card.
Of course,
Um,
absolutely.
so you talk highly of Alligator for good reason, and I'm always amazed about when I deal with you or when I deal with anybody from Alligator. There is a certain level of professionalism, and also with the artist, that there's a certain professionalism that they have. Is that something that, like, if somebody signs with Alligator, is there work methodology that's preached to them that says,
Mm,
being an alligator artist means
right.
you have to do this, or
Well,
this is what we expect, or does it not work that way?
well, I know Motown used to have a finishing school.
Yeah.
That's an old-fashioned term. They would have what they called a finishing school, where they would train their artists on dance moves and media moves. And how, we don't. Bruce, when he's signing artists, and we all have input into artists who get signed, but mostly this is rolling through Bruce. He's looking for that. That's part of the equation. Is this an artist I can work with? Is this an artist who's responsible? Is this an artist who's gonna and we talk about that with the artists and let them know how we work and what we expect, of course. But for the most part, the folks coming in want that.
Hmm.
Blues is so different. Blues is the artists, these blues artists love that the audience likes them. And they love that the audience wants to talk to them. And they want to do anything they can to encourage that and be a part of that. So really, over the course of my career, I can count on a very few small fingers on small hands bigger issues with any given artist. And I'm not going to name any names, but really, for the most part, we've got folks that know how we work and are happy to work with us the way that we work. And if they want to work a different way, we're happy to accommodate them. But the goal of like not missing interviews, not you know, not returning phone calls. If I'm calling you, it's not to waste your time. It's Lonnie Brooks used to say, I miss Lonnie Brooks. You say, Marc, whenever you call, I'd love it because something good's about to happen. Because it was an interview. Or it was, hey, Lonnie, I got you on Letterman. We're going to New York. So that part of my job I like. If I do a good job, I'm kind of in the background and hidden, but I'm getting a lot of thank yous. I'm getting a lot of, hey, great job. Great to have this in my, this feather in my cap.
So, as somebody who didn't know the blues and who didn't know the music industry very well when you started, what surprised you the most getting into this business and getting into the blues from an
Well,
alligator publicist point of view?
yeah, I certainly knew the blues. I knew the music. It was everything else that was new to me. Um, it just felt good. I mean, for me, it just felt like it was the right thing to be doing. This is everything I've worked for in my life. I've worked up to this. I felt like I won the lottery, and I still do. I had worked those few corporate jobs that I didn't like. I worked sort of that fun celebrity job at the Writers Guild, so I kind of got a little taste of the entertainment business. But I wasn't blown over by just being in the entertainment business. That didn't do it for me. But working with these artists with this music that mattered to me made it easy for me to pitch this music to press. I would find it very hard to have to work a project or a style of music that I didn't like. It helps that I'm a fan and I could talk about this music all day long, whether this was my job or not. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I, personally, when I found out that my efforts really were important in this train of success for these artists that we work with, and that if I were to fall down on the job, if I were to not do my job, it wouldn't be not just noticeable, but it would be hurtful. Now, Bruce is a tough guy. He's a tough employer, and he's got a high bar. And Bruce and I have just a wonderful relationship, and I just can't speak well enough about him and all the things that he's given me, both specifically and non, over the years. But because of Bruce, I met my wife.
He
I,
had a
I
hand in that?
I met my wife at a Marcia Ball concert. We went to see Marcia Ball, to scout Marcia Ball. And my wife, Cindy, a previous Alligator employee, was not working there when I got my job, but had come to this Marcia Ball show with a mutual friend of hers who still was at the label. I've got two wonderful children. And, I point to Bruce. He's like, well, all this great stuff has happened because I work at Alligator. If nobody gets rich in the blues, so nobody's making a lot of money here. And I never cared because of this job satisfaction that I have, of this family that I have, of this, I live fairly close to the office, so I also didn't have a commute to work. There's 2 hours back in my day, every single day. And it just mattered so much to me that I felt like I won the biggest lottery around because I was doing what I love. So when I said earlier that my work life and my personal life sort of melded, I mean that in a good way because it was all this lifestyle. Tinsley Ellis, the blues rocker out of Atlanta, said when he first went professional, and he's been on Alligator for decades, but when he first did his first record, got professional, he sort of ascribed it as sort of saying like it was like joining the circus. And I know exactly what he means. And certainly Alligator is not a circus, and the blues music isn't a circus, but the lifestyle is a little different. It's non-conventional. And I think I was probably born a non-conventional person. And the fact that I've been very lucky to live and work a non-conventional life has been wonderful.
When you were growing up, and you'd mentioned Chicago a few times, whether it be listening to Bad Bad Leroy Brown or getting to know the blues from Muddy Waters, how aware were you of the significance of Chicago to the blues?
Oh, I knew, of course, the home of the blues, Sweet Home Chicago. I don't think I knew at that point, as much about the migration that happened and the sort of these different, really inner specifics. But I sure knew Sweet Home Chicago and home of the blues. And in 1980, Chicago had something called Chicago Fest over at Navy Pier. Navy Pier is now a big tourist attraction, restaurants, everything else. Back then, it was the old University of Illinois campus, and it was just an empty pier. And every summer around 1980, they would put barges in the water, and they had a blues stage, and a rock stage, and a metal stage, and a bluegrass stage, and a country stage. And they had a big main stage. And they tried to shape it after Milwaukee's Milwaukee Fest. And as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, I was thrilled because the blues stage had all the artists that were playing at the clubs I couldn't go to. So there's 14-year-old me seeing Mighty Joe Young and seeing Andrew Voice Odom, and there's one guy after another, and my friends were like, let's go see the Scorpions. Like, no, I'm going to stay here. And it's funny because Muddy Waters played, right? And he played with Johnny Winter, and that was it for me. And all my friends wanted to go see Crocus, 14 years old. They wanted to go see the heavy metal band. Maybe they're Canadian, I'm not sure.
No, Crocus isn't. They're from Europe.
Okay,
Great band, though.
I'm not saying they're not a great band. But so me and two of my friends, two guys that I'm still friends with to this day, went and ditched the other guys and saw Muddy. And those other guys went and saw Crocus. And I can't tell you the bona fides that I have now because I saw Muddy Waters in my line of work. I'm fairly young to have seen Muddy. And I saw him at the end, and he, it was everything I wanted it to be. There was this guy, and it brought me back to that first blues record I got. And I remember holding that record, reading the back on this song's from 1952. This one's from 1953. Well, in 1980, 1953 seemed like it was just worlds away. It wasn't anything that was relatable to where I was that day. So that was a big moment to go see, all those blues artists, and it was also, changing for me. Years later, I saw I think I went to see Eddie Clearwater when I was in college. I was not 21, and I think we had to sneak in. Well, then all these years later, there I'm working with Eddie Clearwater. All these things sort of circled back into me, and they really they really sort of for some reason things tend to circle back. Years later, I was working with Coco Taylor, and I got her a spot to sing the seventh inning stretch, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" at Wrigley Field. So there I was back in my old stomping grounds in a skybox, getting fed the gourmet skybox meal, accompanying Coco Taylor. And when it was time to walk her up to the booth, the broadcast booth, to sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," lo and behold, I passed 5 or 6 vendors, buddies that I knew. And there's my brother sitting in the seat. I didn't even know he was at the game. He was just sitting in the seat watching. And there's me and Coco walking right past my brother up into the broadcast booth.
I have to ask. I know you work for both the White Sox and the Cubs as a vendor. Do you prefer one team over the other?
I'm a Cubs guy. I'm a Northside Cubs guy. And I always, as a vendor, made a lot more money at Cubs games than Sox.
Okay, so what? How does one become a Cubs fan versus a White Sox fan? Is it just the
In Chicago,
geographic?
it's mostly geographic in Chicago, but not 100%. I'm a fan of good baseball. So I'll be honest. If the Cubs are bad and the Sox are playing good baseball, I'll watch the Sox. If
Okay,
the,
so you still
or
you would
in
go to the stadium and see them.
Yeah, less so. The Sox were so historically bad last year. It'll be a while before I go see them. And baseball's different, like everything else now, right? It's just used to be you can go to a Cubs game for sit in the bleachers for $5. Those days are long gone. But the fact that just for me that it came back together, that me as a vendor and me as a Blues fan, and there I am as an alligator back at Wrigley, and back doing that again. It made a difference. We worked with. I'll tell you another. You asked me about different things that happen with different artists. I know I'm a little bit tangential here, but that's kind of how my brain works. This wasn't a story specifically with me. It was more with the radio department. But we had our radio guy wanting Sun Seals to go on a Friday afternoon with his band in the last minute to a radio show, a afternoon zoo radio show. And it was, it's a good opportunity. You get on it's the radio, the station's downtown. Sun lived way on the south side. And I'll never forget the radio guy at the time talking to him on the phone saying, "Son, you got to do this. It's a big deal. It's really important." And Sun's response then and there, and we've talked about this a lot at the office, was, "Important to who?" And again, there's 3 words that really opened my eyes, because he wasn't kidding. It would have been impossible for him to get the band together, get a van, and try to drive downtown on a Friday afternoon in traffic and park downtown. And I don't remember how it all fell out. I think maybe they found another day and they didn't. And Sun was very cooperative. He always never minded doing interviews and stuff. But his important to who line was, again, it was another lesson. Let's make sure, like, when we're asking artists to do things, that it's the right thing to do and it's worthwhile. And it's not going to turn their day upside down. And it's not going to, they're not getting paid. He wasn't getting paid to do this. So let's try to get the artist paid. Let's try to make it easy. Let's always try to make it easy for the artist to be the artist. And then that's just another one of those, another funny and sort of just, it happened. And I think about that specific line quite a bit in how I go about my daily, when I'm not thinking I have to be busy every minute of every day, I think about Sun going important to who. And these things are.
I wonder, with all that you've done and the people you've worked with, and you've mentioned a number of highlights already, which are pretty amazing. But if I was to ask you what would be the biggest highlight of your career, what would that be?
Oh, I can give you 4 or 5 different answers. But my first one's going to say my friendship with Mavis Staples. We did Mavis's comeback record in 2004 called "Have a Little Faith."
One of the greatest albums, and I don't know why more people, why she doesn't play more songs from that album. It is an amazing album.
She told me she was going to start playing "God Is Not Sleeping" again, but
Yeah,
Mavis, oh, she's awesome. So when we picked that record up, she was floundering. Pops had passed. The Staple Singers were not working. A little bit here and there. They would do a gig here, a gig there, but they didn't have a record. That Mavis recorded this record, "Have a Little Faith," with her own money, and she was trying to sell it, and she couldn't get anybody to buy it. And somehow her manager at the time said, "You should talk to Bruce Iglauer, Alligator." And Mavis said, "I'm not a blues singer. I'm a gospel singer." And I don't know, someone said, Mavis, it's the same thing. And she came to Alligator. We had a full staff lunch with everybody. We met Mavis, we met Yvonne. And soon after, there was Mavis did a tribute to Johnny Paycheck, of all things, at a City of Chicago event. And she played a couple songs on stage. And I think my older daughter Emma was 5 or maybe 6 or 7 at the time. Mavis loves kids. And somehow Mavis met Emma, took her by the hand, and dragged her backstage. And my wife and I kind of looked at each other like, okay, did we just lose our daughter? So we found our way backstage, and they just bonded, and we bonded, and I treasure the work I did with Mavis. I treasure the fact that um, our efforts launched her back into the mainstream. I treasure the fact that I wish she would have stayed with Alligator. The fact that she didn't stay and was able to become who she is right now is just so beautiful to me. And I still have I'm not close to Mavis. I'm not at her house for Thanksgiving either, but we're close and we're friendly. And that means so much to me. We reissued Have a Little Faith for Record Store Day earlier this year. And I
Mm.
had the great honor of interviewing Mavis and writing the liner notes to this new reissued edition. So to have my name next to Mavis's name in the liner notes in the packaging of this album is just a beautiful, beautiful thing to me, and it means so much to me. And it's something I'll always treasure. Mavis, the other day, my daughter was at a Maggie Rogers show here in Chicago. Maggie Rogers, a very popular singer. And Maggie brought Mavis out as a surprise at the end at the big stadium at the United Center. And Emma, my daughter, texted Mavis the next day and said, "Hey, I saw you at the show last night." And Mavis, like a little schoolgirl, texted her back immediately and saying, "Oh, Emma, I'm so glad you were there. It means so much to me that you were there. And it was my first time singing at the United Center. And now that I know that you were there, it's even better."
Wow, what a
And that's again,
class act.
class act, right? So we're going to go see her in a few weeks. She's having her 85th birthday concert here in Chicago, where the whole family is going to go see her. And that is really one of my treasured moments. As a publicist, one of my greatest scores has nothing at all to do with music. 12 years ago now, my mom passed, and we were waiting, at the funeral director's office. So all of a sudden, between a passing and a funeral, there's a lot of time on your hands. And I remember waiting. I don't know what we were waiting for. It was before the funeral, and I thought, well, I'm a publicist. What could I do? And I sat and I wrote. My mom did some interesting things in her life. She was worked with radioisotopes. She was a nurse. But I wrote a bio. I wrote a quick bio on my mom. And I contacted the Chicago Tribune obituary writer. And they do both paid and editorial obituaries. And I pitched an editorial obituary on my mom, and they took it. And they wrote this great big article in the Chicago Tribune on my mom.
Wow.
So I look at that as really one of my greatest publicity scores. She would have hated it. She would have hated the publicity. But I really I look at that as it's just like someone asked me what were your greatest score. It was that my greatest music score. One of my favorite music memories in a big score. I had heard that the Conan O'Brien show was coming to Chicago. They were going to do a week's worth of shows at the Chicago Theater, and I do have a relationship with the booker. And I called him right up and I said, "Hey, Jim, Chicago, you got to do blues. Let's do something blues." And we chatted for a while, and it was growing. And I could tell that I caught his attention. And all of a sudden, there were a couple of writers on the line that got on the line, a couple of producers got on the call. And we did a piece with Little Ed. You can still find it on YouTube. And we did a piece with Little Ed teaching Conan how to play blues guitar. And we filmed it at old Blues on Halsted here Blues on Halsted here in Chicago. Spent the better part of a morning and afternoon in the club filming it. What an experience. First of all, Conan and his whole crew are some of the best people you'd ever want to meet. No art, no anything with Conan except great. Just pleasant, funny, normal person. Um, and that was a big deal. And that ran numerous times and really helped, it helped Ed. It helped Ed get more gigs. It helped Ed and the band stay on the road longer. And it's a funny 10-minute piece. And out of nowhere, it was me thinking like, yeah, you should probably have blues. And the next thing I know, there's a 10-minute network television piece starring Little Ed. And it's funny and it's worth watching if you dig it up. I look at that as a real, as, one of my more fun scores. It was one of the most fun days I think I ever had. I've got a lot of fun days.
Not to turn dark, but and you
That's right. I
mentioned
just talked about my mom's funeral.
but the unfortunate thing about working in the blues is the fact that you and I have both dealt with a lot of musicians who are no longer here.
Right.
You have the task or the job oftentimes of letting people know,
That's right.
all the media outlets know the passing of certain musicians. And I presume that some of them were not easy for you to write.
Not at all. I
Yeah.
get into when this happens, I take the responsibility of my job very high at all times. I get it. I know that I take the obituaries even more to heart because I know this is the last thing their families are going to possibly read about, you know, to professionally read about. And it's not always easy to do, and you can't always get the attention that you want. But I go in when these happens, when William Clark passed, when Michael Burks passed, I go into work mode. So I like I feel like I get into a mode where the emotions they're not there yet, and I just want to do such a good job, and I want to make sure that I get every fact right, and that I am going to write a bio that's going to help sell a story to somebody to write for their magazine or their newspaper or print it in full as is. Um, and I'm careful about getting the spelling right and the stories right. And in these days of fake news, it's very important to me to never deliver anything inaccurate. And mistakes do happen. We try very hard through a very rigorous proofing process to not let mistakes get out. So as far as writing the obituaries, it's hard. Had Coco Taylor records long before I worked here. I got to know Coco Taylor very close and very personally. And, she always said, when people would ask her, when are you going to retire, Coco? She'd say, never. What am I going to do? Sit home and watch Jerry Springer? And she all but did, work to the very end. And to me, this is a beautiful thing.
Hmm.
And of course, it's sad when we lose these people, but the legacies that they leave are so important and so overwhelming and beautiful. And it's hard to say that they're gone because, I want to hear I Got What It Takes. That's a great song by Coco Taylor. It's there for me when I need it. When I need the uplift from that music, it's still there for me. And that's a big deal.
Did you ever, your passion for the blues, did it ever, I mean, I guess this passion for music in general, but being in the business and having to deal with it day to day, has your passion ever waned or?
I get sick of the business sometimes. I don't, I don't, luckily most blues artists work at a level that's not big enough to, I put this, cause trouble. Uh, Most of the artists I work with are just such hardworking, good people. And the music, no, I don't get tired of the music. In fact, I just picked up a record collection from a guy. This is a whole nother story that probably had 600 blues albums in it. And I've been listening to them over the last few months. And I love them. It's all, I just, no, the music talks to me. I sometimes get tired of some of the business of work, but not even. I mean, it's just, to, if Bruce is listening, I want to raise. But what I'll say to you is, I would do this job for free because it's if I could get away with it. Because it just is, to be part of this community, to be part of this small, vibrant blues world, to be a person at the biggest label in the genre, helping these artists have careers and helping the label survive. And I know I'm only a small part of it. We have 12 other people, and everybody's work is as important as everybody else's. And together we really are a machine that is capable of doing quite a bit. for the right artist. So no, I don't get tired of the music. I'm older now. Sometimes I go, oh, maybe I don't feel like going out tonight. Maybe I don't want to be out till 2 in the morning at Legends tonight. And then I kick myself for thinking like that. Like how lucky are you? But but aside from that, no, the music is so meaningful to me. I'm going to tell you another quick story that goes back. I think I was at Alligator 3 or 4 months, and there was a blues festival. It was going to run all summer long. It was going to be BB King. It was the BB King Blues Festival, 1993 probably. Eric Johnson, maybe. I want to say Buddy Guy for sure. And then what they call the Alligator All Stars. And that was Coco Taylor, Lonnie Brooks, and Junior Wells. Junior was not on Alligator, but they lumped him in with the Alligator All Stars for whatever reason. So there was a big, in New York City, there was going to be a big press conference with the artists, with Buddy and BB and Lonnie. And I went with Lonnie to go to this press conference where they're going to talk about the summer tour. And Junior came. So there I am at O'Hare Airport, sitting on an airplane with Lonnie and Junior and me. And I've been at Alligator 2 months. We go to New York. I get everybody to Hard Rock. We were there early because Alligator gets places early. It's what we do. And we had some time to kill. And I stood off by myself. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know, I didn't want to be in anybody's way. Lonnie and Junior were sitting at a big round table. Must have been 12 seats at the table, all by themselves. And Lonnie saw me standing off to the side. Now, I had just met Lonnie. I didn't know him well. And I was just kind of standing off against the wall, trying to be out of the way. Lonnie motioned me over. So, what are you doing? He said, come sit down. He sits me between him and Junior Wells. And we carried on for the next hour. And boy, my feelings for Lonnie were through the roof. What a nice man. And I told Ronnie, his son, Ronnie Baker Brooks, now we're working with him, and gorgeous. Love working with Ronnie. It's another full circle. And I told Ronnie that story, and he's said, yeah, that's Dad. That's Dad. And he made sure that I wasn't alone. And boy, and so for the next hour, I was hearing stories I can't repeat, very off-color stories about some blues artists I can tell you off the air. But what an opportunity. And there's a picture. A friend of mine was with me, and I have a picture of me sitting between these two guys with my eyes just popping out of my head. I just look like I don't know what I'm doing there.
I was going to say that when researching for this interview, I went to your Facebook site, and I believe it's posted somewhere in there.
I don't do a lot of Facebook, but I probably posted that.
Yeah.
That photo.
Well, that's pretty special.
It's pretty special. But these are, again, it just goes to the type of people that these artists are. They're legends. They're larger than life legends. But when it came down to it, Lonnie Brooks, who barely knew me, didn't want me off by myself. He wanted me to be part of the group. It's just good people. That's, who does that?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have been mad at him if he left me standing there. I would have expected that.
Maybe not Chuck Berry.
No, see, Chuck, I would have run the other way. It's funny. I've had a lot of full circle things in my life and career. I never did get to circle back around to Chuck.
Marc, thank you so much for doing this. It's a real pleasure. You've been very kind to me over the years, giving me access to the Alligator artists, and it's a real pleasure to get to know you a little bit.
Oh, thank you for all that you do for blues. I mean, I'm looking at how many of these have you done now? 400?
420 something, yeah.
Right. I mean, there's living history, and it's, to prepare for this interview, I've listened to a number of your interviews, and boy, I mean, this is an important resource forever.
Well, thank you. I feel kind of embarrassed because I just kind of do it for myself, and it's my enjoyment. But
see, that's the thing. That's the best. If I learned anything, like the best things that are going to come out of life are what you're doing for your own enjoyment.
Yeah, for sure.
What you're doing, because if you don't do it, you don't know what else you'd be doing. It goes for blues, and it goes for so much else as well.
Is there anything that you want to talk about with the upcoming releases from Alligator?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, we have the new Ronnie Baker Brooks album that's just out, and it's wonderful. Ronnie is the supremely talented older son of Lonnie Brooks. His other music making son is, of course, Wayne Baker Brooks. Shamika Copeland just was nominated for 3 Grammy Awards for her latest album. Alligator has never in our history had an artist receive multiple Grammy Awards in 1 year.
Wow.
Multiple nominations in 1 year. So that's a big deal. And Shamika, again, is working very hard, and hard work pays off. Upcoming, we're going to have a new record from Tommy Castro. and the Painkillers, West Coast blues rock guitarist. He's made his first full, solid, real, what he calls his real blues album. And he's covered a bunch of very obscure songs. He's written a bunch of brand new ones, and that's going to be a big record for him. That's going to be out in February. Our other big release upcoming, probably April next year, is from a band out of Memphis called Southern Avenue. And they're a family band, not unlike the Staple Singers. They have the three Jackson sisters who were raised in Memphis, weren't very much allowed to listen to secular music, and as they get older, did. The guitar player in the band is a man named Ori Naftali, who was born in Israel, who interestingly enough, spent his whole youth in Israel listening to nothing but Memphis music and Memphis soul music. So long story, but they got together in Memphis, and they have one of the greatest, most modern bands, blues, R&B, and very uplifting music and encouraging, and they're just terrific. They toured this summer with the Outlaw Music Tour with Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson. In fact, the famously reclusive Bob Dylan, who, if you ever talk to a band that opened for him, will tell you, we never met Bob. He stayed in his room, and we never saw him, and he never said two words to us. Well, he stood at the side of the stage more than once during this outlet tour to watch Southern Avenue. And at one show, he asked for a picture. Now, again, if you know anything about Bob Dylan, he doesn't want to be in pictures, and he never asked for one. And he asked for a picture with these guys. So this is an exciting group for us, and we're very happy to be working with them. And then we're always signing more folks. So it's one thing about Alligator is we don't look back. We're not a reissue label. You'll never see us, putting out old. There are other labels that do a very good job of reissuing older titles. But we're always looking forward. 52, 53 years old. And our goal is to still introduce the next generation of blues artists to the next generation of blues.
Well said. And thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you. It's again, important to me. Bruce talks about in his book, Coco Taylor having said that something, I want to try to get this right. God bless the bridge that carries me across. And the way sort of we see that, I know the way Bruce looks at it and the way I do, is that Coco's on one side of the bridge, the audience is on the other, and I'm this guy that's going to bring you two together. I'm gonna walk you. I'm gonna walk this music from you to this audience, and I'm gonna do my best to get everybody on this bridge together. Enjoy this music, but listen to it, and I take that responsibility really to heart. I never felt like I had to do a good enough job to make Bruce happy. And I always felt like my work will make Bruce happy. And it has.
Well said. Thank you, Marc. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
It's really fun. And I can't believe an hour, more than 1 hour. My goodness. Get me started.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this.
If you need anything else, please feel free to call.
Thanks.